So what are we doing about it? Well, we have a number of targets. The Kyoto Protocol commits us to 12.5% greenhouse gas emission reduction on 1990 levels by 2010. We've already achieved this. But we have a voluntary target of 20% of carbon dioxide emission reductions by 2010. We haven't achieved this. The Energy White Paper, which was a piece of legislation from 2003, sets us a target of 60% carbon dioxide emissions reduction by 2050. But very importantly, this is being superseded by the Climate Change Bill. This is brand new legislation. It's not yet come into play. It's still going through Parliament. But one of the changes to this is that it actually sets us a legally binding target of 80% of carbon dioxide emissions reductions by 2050. It's a very challenging target, but it shows the importance of what we need to achieve. We also have targets for renewable energy generation. The EU, European Union Renewables Directive, sets us a target of 10% of our electricity to be generated from renewable sources by 2010. And we have an aspirational target of doubling that to 20% by 2020. Fuel poverty is another area that we have targets which link to climate change. Basically, a large proportion of the population in the United Kingdom, more than 2 million households, suffer from what is known as fuel poverty. And this basically means that they have to spend 10% or more of their income on keeping their home warm, heating their home, keeping it at a comfortable temperature. Some people spend that much money so they keep their home warm, but they have to go without in other areas, and sometimes these things, like they go without really good food. Other people just don't have the money. They need to spend it on other things, so they don't heat their home. They live in cold homes, which can often be damp homes, and that can really affect their health. Heart disease, respiratory illness. It can also have impacts on social things such as school, because if maybe they're only affording to heat one room, so all of the family spend all of their time in that room. The children have to do their homework in that room, but there's lots of noise and things going on, so they can't concentrate, so they don't do so well at school. And we have a target to eradicate fuel poverty amongst vulnerable households. The way it impacts on climate change is one of the things that can be done is to improve the energy efficiency of the home, which helps with reducing carbon emissions. So how are we going to meet these targets? Well, nationally, the national government sets the policy framework. There's been a dramatic increase in the number of legislative drivers, policy, legislation that's been coming out to tackle climate change in the last 5 years. And one of these is the Climate Change Bill. It's not actually legislation yet, but the government's already making moves to put the structure in place to tackle it. They're taking the Energy Department from our Trade Ministry, and they're taking the Climate Change Department from our Environmental Ministry, and they're actually putting them together as one ministry to help with the joined-up thinking. They're not quite there on the joined-up thinking yet. I rang the other day to ask a question, and I got through to the telephone and it said, if your inquiry is regarding energy, press 1. If it's regarding climate change, press 2. Obviously my inquiry is about both. They're intrinsically linked, so they're not quite there, but hopefully that will change. They're also responsible for meeting the targets that we saw on the other page. If they don't meet them, one risk is that they don't get re-elected by the people, but also there is a legal process that we can go through and challenge them if they don't meet the targets. They can and should lead by example, and they are occasionally brought up on it by things like articles in the newspaper showing government buildings with lights left on all night. So they are in the public eye and they can lead by example. They have a role to regulate and develop the market. One way of regulating it is through the building regulations. These stipulate the minimum standards required for building and refurbishing homes. And there is a specific section on energy use. They've actually introduced the Code for Sustainable Homes as well, which is a sustainability design level for houses. There's different levels. The more sustainable, the higher the level of house. And this actually shows the path that the building regulations will take, because the building regulations are updated regularly. The next change will be in 2010, and they already know kind of where an industry knows where the government is thinking they'd like to achieve for the minimum requirements. They also have the opportunity to regulate and develop the market using financial incentives, so tax alleviation on things like energy efficiency measures, higher tax on things that aren't so great for climate change, but also funding, and I'll tell you in just a moment about one of the funding programmes. They have a role to encourage regional and local action. For example, they set regional planning policies that the local government have to have regard to when they're producing their own policies. And they have a role to educate and inform people. They run national advertising campaigns telling people about energy use and climate change. And they also fund a network of advice centres throughout the UK where people can go and ask questions, find out what measures they can do for their own home, where they can get funding, that sort of thing. But local action is absolutely vital to tackling climate change and reducing our energy use. Climate change is huge. It's such a big concept that individuals often don't feel able to tackle it. They're daunted by it. They're unsure of what they can do. And when that happens, they tend to do nothing. They just head down, keep going. But if we can localise the problem and build community responses to it, we break it down to a smaller level so people can and feel able to take action. So the local government has a vital role to play. They are actually assessed against their work on climate change. There's some very new legislation that's come in, the Comprehensive Performance Assessment, and for this they have set targets at reducing the carbon dioxide emissions per person in their area, and they're assessed against how well they're achieving this. Carbon trading is another scheme as well that the bigger authorities will have to take part in, which will help with reducing emissions. And again, they too have to lead by example. Importantly, some new legislation that's come from Europe and into the United Kingdom is the requirement that for any publicly owned building, so one owned by the local authority, that the public frequently go into, so like libraries or leisure centres, they now have to have up on the wall a display energy certificate. It's a certificate that basically shows how energy efficient or inefficient the building is. It has to be done on a yearly basis so people could see how the local authority is improving. And it shows how much energy they are using in the building. It also shows how much they could be using if they were using it more efficiently. So this is a very visual thing that the public can see how local government is leading by example. They also have strategies for reducing fuel poverty, and they have a requirement to set the local development framework, and this is the planning regulations. More and more recently, local authorities have been putting in place planning regulations that means for a new development, if anyone wants to build a new development, they have to build it to a certain sustainability level. Quite often it's the Code for Sustainable Homes level 3. So the new homes have to be more sustainable. Not only that, but a certain percentage of the carbon emissions from the new development have to be reduced by using renewable technologies. So if someone goes into an area and they want to build a new development, they have to make it sustainable and they have to use on-site renewable technologies. And this was something that was led at a local level, so it was a local authority that started this, and then that knocked on into the higher up, the national policies. They also have a role as a local authority to educate and inform the population in their area, so they run various programmes.